In July, the Supreme Court's ruling on the West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency's case significantly reduced the EPA's ability to make greenhouse gas emissions reductions under the Clean Air Act. The EPA can no longer implement the best systems of emissions reductions on a broad scale and are instead limited to individual power plants. This threatens to derail all federal climate action. Now the responsibility is falling on states to implement individual policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as we approach a 2-degree increase in global temperature. My name is Kern, and this ruling was announced during my summer internship with the Environmental Defense Fund. The EDF is a nonprofit group working to unite economics, science, and law to develop sustainable solutions to today's biggest environmental issues. I was really disturbed when I heard the Supreme Court's ruling because it was crazy to me that they were actively working to undo all of the efforts that environmental groups like the EDF were putting in for decades. But now I feel more aware of the true impact of our conservation efforts and policy, the importance of policy. As the Energy Transition Communications intern, my work focused on decarbonization in the transportation sector. As you can see, transportation accounts for about a quarter of the US greenhouse gas emissions. This is from 2020, but that number's continued to grow. Specifically, I worked on medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification in states like New Jersey, New York, and Illinois. My team's communication goal was to persuade these state government officials and utility commissions to adopt more ambitious zero-emission transportation policies. The Supreme Court ruling was not directly targeting transportation, but now federal climate action lines are blurred, so it will be way harder to implement federal rules on transportation emissions. So we know that the government uses their power to influence and regulate people's behaviors, but we were trying to figure out how we, as people and as communicators, could influence the government's agenda. So the most important basis of any persuasive communication effort is targeting the audience to inform your communication strategy. To do this, I was conducting research on the media context within these states to learn their position on zero-emission transportation. Each state's individual contextual factors would affect our communication strategy. For example, New York had adopted clean truck policies and Illinois did not. Throughout my internship, I monitored the media to find opportunities for us to join the conversation about truck and bus electrification and clues on how to tailor our communication efforts accordingly. I tracked the context trends, so what was being talked about, as well as the outlet trends, where these conversations were happening. This gave me a better sense of current and future positioning of states according to transportation. While I was media monitoring, I was drawn to the theme of environmental justice. As we know, certain communities' perspectives have historically been left out of policy implementation and development, leaving them vulnerable to harm with no legal protection. Unsurprisingly, diesel emission threats pose the greatest risk to these groups. Without sufficient policy, vulnerable urban, warehouse, and marginalized communities are exposed to more diesel fumes and particulate matter than other communities. Studies like this from the EPA show that these groups suffer from more lung issues as well as higher rates of hospitalization from exposure to poor air quality. Sharing these experiences matters because they demonstrate the real consequences of inadequate climate action within our communities. For one of my projects, I analyzed the media context in New York and pitched informed recommendations for future communications efforts. I found only a handful of relevant articles, and as you can see, of the 5 articles, there wasn't really a clear context trend among them. However, I did notice that there were no articles about the health impacts of diesel fuel on New Yorkers, despite the city being congested and polluted. In terms of outlet trends, all of the articles I found were published in national trade outlets, suggesting that this was not a local media conversation that was happening. Other contextual factors included the fact that New York already had existing clean trucks policies and were implementing more at the time, and I saw this as an opportunity to shed light on the negative health consequences and to persuade the government to reassess their solutions and ensure the prioritization of these vulnerable communities. So analyzing the media and the context really helped me to see what needed to be said and where we can make an impact. The specific recommendation that I ended up making was to produce an op-ed from the perspective of a health expert in New York, such as an experienced pulmonologist at Mount Sinai or within a vulnerable community, and pitching this to a local news outlet. I wanted this to serve as a call to action to persuade local voters to demand stronger policy and for policymakers to consider more ambitious goals to protect the health of their community. There were many different approaches that I could have taken, such as a more data-driven approach, but I thought that storytelling was a great persuasive strategy to make the message more memorable to a larger audience. Since this was just a pitch, there was no metrics of an impact, but I look forward to seeing how a piece based on my analysis could advance New York conversations about emissions impact and policy. So to answer my previous question, how can we as people and communicators influence the government's agenda? It's all about persuasive messaging. We may not have the same legal power as governments, but we do have the power of persuasion, not to mention the power of our vote. Understanding the context of our target audience can inform the design of our strategic messaging. With the proper message, timing, and in the right places, we can influence the trends, priorities, and agendas of the government. As communication strategists, thinking like our target audience is key. It makes me think of an ancient military saying, "To know your enemy, you must become your enemy." While this is no war zone, we are fighting with our words for the environment, for the people, and for the future. Thank you.